Could you explain the product, how you're helping, and also how you're leveraging those tools?
Pretty much every enterprise that I talk to is trying to figure out, like, how do we adopt generative AI and how do we accelerate and how do we not get left behind compared to the competition? But also, how do we make sure that we're not exposing the company to a ton of risk at the same time? We're not interested in the risks around you building your own models. I always felt that was going to be a more niche bit of the market. So what we're doing is helping companies adopt the third-party applications and uses of AI. When it comes to hiring, you're going to be looking for people that are very AI native and savvy and can quickly apply those tools. And people that are holding on to the prior way of doing things are going to struggle. So that's our whole emphasis is that AI, enabling the AI adoption.
Yeah, you guys are the seatbelt for AI adoption in the enterprise. Alastair, welcome to the show.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for hosting me.
Absolutely. I've been really looking forward to our conversation. You have such great experience having already had an incredibly successful company, having already sold an incredibly successful company in the cybersecurity space. And then you started the company you're at now, that you began, Harmonic Security. And Harmonic Security is focused on one of the biggest topics, which is generative AI. And it's focused on generative AI in the enterprise. So if you could, maybe for our listeners and for me, explain how you came up with the idea, how you ended up on the cutting edge of this, and why this is so important both to you and to your customers.
I'm having a lot of fun building Harmonic. I'm really bouncing out of bed and feel like, every morning it's just exciting to get into this space with what we're doing. How did Harmonic come about? Well, I had a previous journey, as you mentioned, with Digital Shadows, and we can talk some more about that. We got acquired in July of 22, and I hadn't really thought much past that, to be honest. I wasn't sure what to do next, and I know you're in that boat a little bit at the moment yourself, and we can dig into kind of what you go through thinking about what are you going to spend the next years doing? Because up until that point, when you're building a company, a startup, it's your total focus, right? It's got all your energy, and you're not really thinking about anything else. And so suddenly, when that's that stops, it's pretty challenging, I think, often for entrepreneurs to figure out what's next in their journey. And so you get people that go down all kinds of paths. But and I was still in this sort of figuring it out mode when ChatGPT appeared on the scene, and it just blew my mind. I'd seen the GPT-3 release a while back before that, and thought it was very cool. But then, of course, ChatGPT comes along, and it's the kind of killer app for the technology. And I this time, as compared to the last time, I'm living in Silicon Valley, and so I was able to very quickly talk to a whole lot of very smart people that are building this technology and applying it in various ways. And I could just start to look ahead and think how the world was going to change pretty fundamentally in terms of tech. And that really inspired me to want to get involved. And my brain, coming from the security side, quickly went to, what are the security issues with this, but also how can we use it for security, this new technology? And Harmonic's a bit of both. We're AI for security, but we're also security for AI. And that's the starting point.
Interesting. That it's actually a lot of interesting things you just said. One is that you're in the Bay Area for this one, in the Silicon Valley. And so I'm curious, before we talk about Harmonic a little bit deeper, why is that better than when you were at Deep Shadows, or different when you were at Deep Shadows, and what advantages are you seeing?
Yeah, so I set up Digital Shadows in London all the way back in 2011. So it was quite some time ago. And at the time, the London tech scene was pretty non-existent. There wasn't that, culture of startups. Most people, when they graduate with computer science, were going to work for one of the big banks or consultancies. Even the likes of Google and the other FANG companies hadn't really got going in the UK to much of an extent at that point. So it was, entrepreneurial culture wasn't really there, and the startup culture wasn't there. I didn't know anyone that had started a company before, had to really get going in the embryonic days of the London startup scene. It is a lot better today, no doubt. There's a lot of VC activity. There's a lot of startups. It's the outside of US and China, it's number 3 actually for in amount of VC dollars that are getting invested, and there's a lot of good companies coming out of there. But it's still orders of magnitude away from Silicon Valley in terms of the environment. I think the values and the attitudes of the people that you're spending the time with. And then for this AI revolution in particular, I mean, all of the top companies are in San Francisco itself. It's pretty incredible. UK has DeepMind, which is obviously running a lot of Google's AI efforts, but in terms of the talent density in the Bay Area, it's just extraordinary for AI and the ability. Every night of the week there's probably 10 events running in terms of interesting new AI startups coming together and showcasing what they're up to and so on. So if you want to get up to speed quickly on what's happening next, this is undoubtedly the place to be by an order of magnitude.
And so you see an advantage over digital shadows now that you're running Harmonic by being in not just the center of the Silicon Valley, which is known for funding, but also for specifically AI, where a lot of your partners and peers are in.
Yeah, it's a whole ecosystem thing here. So I think there's a lot of differences, right? And so one is the access to the market. US market is obviously the biggest and pretty fantastic. But the Bay Area itself, I mean, and you'll know this, but the security kind of leaders in the Bay Area and all the tech companies, they're pretty entrepreneurial. They like being part of the startup ecosystem. They're used to working with startups. They invite them in, they become advisors, they like sparring with them. It's just a whole thing, right? End to end, and the VCs are in the mix, and there's that whole community, and we all know each other and sort of, make intros where appropriate and help each other out. And you sort of contrast that to pretty much anywhere else on the planet. You're going and introducing what you're doing to security folks in UK, and typically they're not as plugged into that startup community. They're probably a little more risk adverse when it comes to trying out some of those technologies. They don't really understand the venture ecosystem in the same way. So it's coming, but it's just it's generational in the Bay Area, right? You've got so many exited founders here, right? So that flywheel has been turning a long time, and it's just so powerful as a result. And it takes time for the companies to go and exit, and the founders to reappear, help the next generation, and all of that. And that's been building here for so long. It's hard to match.
Yeah, it's interesting, the multi-generational aspect where you have people who've done it before, and you're one of those people who's done it before. So I'm really excited to talk about your journey. But if we can talk about Harmonic really quickly, and you touched on how you're both using AI for threat detection, for understanding what's going on, using AI in your product, but you are also helping companies who are using AI. Could you explain the product, how you're helping, and also how you're leveraging those tools?
Yeah, so if we come to the problem space right now, so pretty much every enterprise that I talk to is trying to figure out, like, how do we adopt generative AI, and how do we accelerate, and how do we not get left behind compared to the competition? But also, how do we make sure that we're not exposing the company to a ton of risk at the same time? And that equation is and conversations around that are happening everywhere. I think the first year since ChatGPT came out, so sort of 2023 and into 24, companies were, they were getting a little sandbox together. They were deploying some sort of form of mostly OpenAI's technology, and then playing around with different use cases and trying to figure out what to do. Very few of those made it into production in any kind of short order. And I think, what we're seeing now is the use cases are becoming a bit clearer. And for most of the use cases, they're really things they're going to end up using third-party sources, services and applications for. So if your use cases are around automating customer success or technical support or bits of the sales cycle, well, those are going to get built into all of the sales tools that you have today, and the customer success tools. All of the SaaS companies are becoming AI companies anyway. So the amount of stuff you want to build internally is I think, ultimately pretty limited. And it's only really the big companies, the big banks, the tech companies in the Bay Area and so on that really have the expertise to be building a lot of their own models that are not just plugging into someone else's efforts. And so where I'm focusing Harmonic, we're not interested in the risks around you building your own models. I always felt that was going to be a more niche bit of the market. So what we're doing is helping companies adopt the third-party applications and uses of AI. And so what happens today in most enterprises, so you've got, there's quite a split. So if we the banks on one end of the spectrum, pretty conservative, highly regulated industry is at one end, and then the tech companies and some other consumer facing ones are a little bit more leaning in. But typically, there's a tension because the business wants to move forward, adopt all these applications as fast as possible. People get used to using them at home, right? We're all using these tools in our daily lives. So if you come into the workplace and you don't have access to your favorite tools, then that's not great.
Absolutely.
And so there's pressure there, and the risk is that your sensitive data makes its way into somewhere it shouldn't go. So you've got IP that ends up in China in DeepSeek or Manus or whatever the latest app is this week, or your so it's compliance issues, it's IP issues, and there are thousands of these applications spinning up all of the time as well. It's not just the big ones that we know about. And so what most organizations do, so part one is they put a policy together, right? Here's our policy for AI and what you can and can't do. No one ever reads the policy, as we all know. Step two is, well, great, we need some visibility into what's going on in the business. Is this being adhered to right now? Like, what are people actually doing? That's pretty challenging. It's pretty manual. They're trying to go through their sort of, their web gateway logs. And, if they've got a SASE solution, they're trying to figure out who's doing what. Not very granular. You don't really get a feel for the use cases that people have. Doesn't cover most of the apps anyway. And then it comes to controls. So what data's going out, and how do we actually stop sensitive data leaving, other than just blocking things? Well, great, there's DLP. We know how DLP goes. Data loss prevention technology tends to be 99% false positives. It's only really looking at social security numbers and credit cards and things like that. Option two is to try and label all the data in the business and classify it and categorize it and blocks it and labels. Just really difficult to roll that out, find all the data, figure out how to accurately label it. And so option three is the one that most have, which is to essentially block everything that hasn't been approved. And so that's where whether it's a short-term measure, of course, because employees are going to find ways around those controls. They'll use apps you're not blocking. They'll send things to their home email addresses or use their.
Because it makes it basically unusable, right?
Yeah, you're holding back progress, right? And it's employees that are just trying to do the right thing. They're just trying to get the job done. But if you don't provide safe ways for them to do that, then they'll go around it to make sure they get the job done. And so I think it's very retrograde to try to block all these things, and you try to force everyone to use your own enterprise version of Copilot or whatever, which is, that's a reasonable first step, but it doesn't really cover this risk, because there's just so many other applications out there and so much opportunity as well. Every sector has a new AI startup building something cool in it that you could take advantage of and improve your business. So then there's this sort of backlog of the security teams having to review all these different tools and figure out what's safe and what isn't to enable the business to use it. And it's just a huge mess today. So that's kind of current state of play. So Harmonic's coming in, and we're saying, well, hey, look, we need to enable access here. We can't just turn off access to all these things, but we obviously don't want your data to leak out. So what we do, so we're a browser extension. Fundamentally, you can roll it out in 30 minutes to the entire company. Our biggest deployment is more than 100,000 end users at the moment. So we're used to scale and working with some very big entities. At that point, we give you visibility at prompt level into all of the use cases, all of the AI adoption in the enterprise, which teams are using which tools, where's the data going, which ones are high risk, and where is the sensitive data going into places it shouldn't go. And the key bit of technology we've built, and this is the real differentiator for us, is our own suite of language models specifically for data protection. So that's the unique thing with Harmonic. We actually developed. This is the AI, fighting fire with fire. So we've built our own AI models that are small language models. They're not going to, do the kids' homework or write you some poetry, but they're exceptionally good at understanding sensitive data, and that is the key. So because of that, on the standard things like customer data, credit card information, whatever, we're way more accurate. So we're 96% fewer false positives than DLP technology. But secondly, we can detect all types of sensitive data. So whether it's structured, unstructured, it's M&A information, it's investment memos, it's insurance claims data, it's legal documents, doesn't matter to us. And we can do prompts, but also spreadsheets, PDFs, whatever types of data. You can apply our models on top of that. So completely changes the game for data protection. We're calling what we're doing zero-touch data protection. And the reason is that once you set this thing up, we can resolve these issues automatically with the end users. We don't need to fire a ton of alerts at the security team, because we're accurate enough that we can just get in the middle when there is a problem. We can coach and nudge end users in the right direction, take the load off the security team, and enable AI adoption. So I actually posted on LinkedIn 10 days ago now. We have a really good 90-day view of one of our customers where their data loss was down 72% over that time frame, but AI adoption was up 300%. And that's the stat I'm most proud of, because it's like, hey, look, we are the enabler, right? So we're turning the security team into the heroes of the AI committee that's enabling AI adoption instead of the Department of No, which we're too
what you're really doing is allowing companies to use AI, because the fear around AI is based on exactly what you said. All of that information, that copy and paste from sensitive documents into some large language model, and being able to allow 300+% adoption while keeping data loss to bare minimum is incredibly valuable and so timely. I'm so excited about your business and what you guys are building.
Thank you. Yeah, it is pretty wild. I mean, we've got offset quarters, so our end of quarter is end of April. But we blew out our meeting goals 2 months into the quarter, so we've got a ton of stuff going on. And we're well ahead of plan. So yeah, it's
I mean, I
it's gonna be
can't say I'm
exciting few months
surprised.
ahead.
One timely thing that I read earlier this week was the founder and CEO of Shopify putting out you read that. It
Yeah.
was a memo around utilizing AI in the enterprise. And the short TLDR version in their company is, it's not a choice, you have to do it.
Yeah, if there's two things that I think are interesting to read this week, I mean, one of them is that Spotify memo, and then I think as a companion to that, have you seen the AI 2027
I have
publication
not.
that went out? So this is it's a pretty well thought through set of scenarios for where AI is going into year 2027. And it's a little sci-fi, but it is, someone that worked at OpenAI is one of the two authors. It's very well thought through. They did a set of predictions in 2021 about
Wow.
this year that are pretty accurate. So I think you put the two together, and it is extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, I think the pace of change is something that we're not really understanding yet. And certainly if you're an employee, I think you have to get savvy with these tools as fast as you can. And trying to stay current is the best defense we probably have to stay relevant in the workplace as time moves on. But yeah, it's
I realize this is a
incredible pace
little
of
bit
development.
outside of the scope of Harmonic and also, founder specific podcast. But when you think of AI and you're dealing with a lot of companies that are using AI internally, how is work going to change? Like for the average worker who's using AI, and for somebody who might just be getting out of school, I don't know, what's out there? What's going to happen?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. I mean, I've got a couple of young kids, and I've got nephews and nieces, and you're just thinking, like, what is the world going to look like when they're coming to get a job? And it's harder to think about, isn't it? Because of the pace of change that we're seeing. And I think the obviously that everyone's
Mm-hmm.
hyping up the agents this year for fairly good reason. I think that may take just a little bit longer than people think, because I think certainly an enterprise, like letting these agents run amok and go and start throwing all your data around and making decisions on your behalf, I think is something that has to be very well understood before lots of companies will let it run generally. But what I expect to see is kind of use case specific solutions. So I think if you constrain the domain and the type of problem you're looking to solve, then having really good specific models and actions that are being taken by agents is going to work and is going to make sense in those constrained scenarios. And in the short term, at least, it's going to be down to the humans understanding how do we harness and use that effectively? How do you specify the problems that you want solved? I think the one that's, I wouldn't say taking me by surprise, but certainly I'm a little shocked at how quickly it's
Mm-hmm.
moving is the coding
Totally.
capabilities, right? And I think that is the biggest game changer, actually. So these models, the models are not great at everything. So I've got my brother's actually in the oil industry. He does a lot of things with spreadsheets. And I've been telling him how great this AI wave is. And he's like, well, hey, look, I've been trying it on spreadsheets and it's terrible. It doesn't work. Right. This is way overhyped. and he's kind of right, because and there's been some improvements recently, but they're not great with spreadsheets right now in terms of like the types of operations that people want to take. But they are really good just naturally at coding for lots of reasons. I mean, inherent to the way that LLMs work, they are extraordinarily good. I think at coding, and over time they're getting better and better and better. And so even with our team now, we're looking at, we're making heavy use of those types of tools, and I think I can see a world where within the next 12 months, everybody's using them. The quantity of code we can output is going to go through the roof very quickly here, and it's going to become in that profession, it's going to become much more about how do you harness and use those tools to 10x yourself. And then, so I think when it comes to hiring, you're going to be looking for people that are very AI native and savvy and can quickly apply those tools. And people that are holding on to the prior way of doing things are going to struggle. So I think it's going to be very uneven how this is felt, right? So there's some areas I talked about, oil industry and spreadsheets probably takes a little bit longer than if you're writing code today, it's you've got to be on top of this stuff. I think.
Well, it's interesting what you're saying, which is programming is a language. These large language models understand that syntax and that quote unquote grammar, if you will, of
Yes.
programming languages, and so it has a lot of training sets to work off of, and can then construct its own versions of it, which makes it very, very powerful. What is Harmonic's input when it comes specifically to coding and protecting potentially maybe IP, maybe, I'm going to go ahead and suggest that it's not storing passwords in plain text and stuff, but like maybe it is. Like, how's Harmonic helping?
Yeah. So in our suite of models, we actually have a number that are looking at code specifically. So we have a general one which can spot any type of code, and that's fine. And some institutions just want visibility of where their code is going. But within that, we also have a couple of more subtle models. Like one of them is looking at algorithms, for example, and spotting those and things that we think are is proprietary code that we can make judgment calls on based on what we're seeing in the specific code sample that's leaving the building. And so we've had just a couple of anecdotes around that side. So we had a proof of concept that was running where the customer said, well, hey, look, your models are not working, and they were firing this example through. And so we went and took a look at it, and what they'd put was a hello world example, and our model was smart enough to know that wasn't sensitive, right? Because it's hello world, that's everywhere. So there's no way you want to flag that as an alert, right? But in the prior way of thinking about this, you'd be like, oh, well, obviously that is, I'm testing it, but our test data's, our models are smart enough to spot the test data, which is really cool, actually, when you think about it. So it's, our approach is much more like having a human looking at the data that's leaving the building and making smart decisions about it. And so it just gives you a very different way of looking at all of these problems. One of the other POCs we ran, it was actually they have there's a new AI system that they're building themselves, and the leader of that project dumped a significant part of the code base into the public version of ChatGPT, asking for help. And so, yeah, it's amazing. Even the experienced people sometimes are doing things that are maybe a little reckless with the material, but it's because they haven't got the right guardrails or the right safe alternatives in place. So you've got to enable people. I think that's our message, is that, hey, look, what are the use cases the business needs? Make sure there's safe ways that they can meet those use cases.
So if you're running a large organization, you're a CISO or CIO of a large organization, and your team is starting to use these very LLM models to do coding, and maybe some of the stuff is mission critical, and maybe some of it is proprietary, and maybe some of it is exposing security patterns inside of your organization that you don't want to be public, would you recommend that they run an LLM on premise? And does Harmonic support that? Or can I use something like a public access API to ChatGPT and still leverage Harmonic? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I'd say I think if you're trying to do everything on prem, it's that's not going to be the
Mm-hmm.
answer. I think you're going to inevitably want to make use of third-party services that are somewhere on the internet. I think the key is you want to make sure that you have eyes and arms around those services. So what is, rather than your engineering team using 10 different coding assistants that you've got no visibility or control around the risks of and where they're
Yes.
hosted and where the data is going, you probably want to first of all, get visibility into the fact that's happening or not. But second of all, figure out, okay, what are the use cases? What's the one we want to standardize on? And pick one and try to steer people towards putting all the information into that. And if they want to use something else, well, we can at least put some controls around that. So either you may want to block some of them, like pretty much everyone we work with wants to block the China hosted version of DeepSeek. So that just gets blocked. But there's plenty of other tools where you might want employees to be able to use them for all kinds of purposes, or even personal use to some extent. But what you don't want is the company corporate or sensitive data going in, and that's where we can put a selective control in place where you can either coach them or and block them, or you could just warn them and give them override if you want. So it's really however you want to do it, and it can be team by team and location by location. So engineers maybe have different restrictions from marketing and
Well, that's
those
where the
types of
browser
things.
extension is so powerful, is you're able to go through the specific input right in the prompt level, as you mentioned. You're able to deploy to different teams. It sounds configurable, which is massive because you can have one team go one way, another go the other. And it also allows you, not just on the engineering side, where yes, there's probably a little bit more prowess and a deeper understanding, but a lot of sensitive information is in your HR team. A lot of sensitive information is in your legal team. A lot of sensitive information is in your operations team, in your sales organization. And all of that is potentially potentially a problem. I can just imagine even myself being in a situation where I'm putting information into the browser, not realizing what I'm doing, and then getting a pop-up saying, "Hey, are you sure you want to name the customers?" or whatever the sensitive information may be.
That's right. Yeah, and I think the key is you want to encourage the employees
Yes.
and not just block them and kind of slap their risks, right? So you want to try to enable that adoption and acknowledge that 99% of them are trying to do the right thing and just trying to get their jobs done. So that's our whole emphasis is that AI, enabling the AI adoption,
Yeah, you guys
just
are the
doing it safely.
seatbelt for AI adoption in the enterprise.
I like
That's
that. I
all
might have to
yours.
steal
All yours. Can
that.
we talk a little bit about
Yeah.
digital shadows and you going through that exit? You're obviously a multi-time entrepreneur. You had a very successful previous exit. For whatever reason, you decided to do it again. Not that this is, first of all, this is a great idea. It's so timely. You're the absolute right person to do it. So humanity, and specifically CISOs and CIOs of large organizations, are very lucky to have you back on the reins. But why are you doing it again?
As I mentioned, I think there's sort of a bit of a reflection period when you've gone through a long journey and you've done your own. I know you're going through that reflection now, and you start to think about what your goals are and what you want to do in life, and I think it's interesting. I thought, at least when I was starting the Digital Shadows journey, that that I had a goal of, obviously, to build the company and have some great outcome for it, and that was sort of the whole point. And I think it sort of probably sounds a bit cheesy, but I think it's true that you realize that the journey is also the destination to some extent, right? And I think there's a group of us. I think you're definitely in this group as well, where you sort of need to be useful and making a difference and building something, and you can't just kind of sit there. And actually, I think, like, through my whole life, the times I've been most unhappy is when I've been, like, underutilized, or I'm not being productive and I'm just kind of sat around, or I'm not able to contribute. I think a bunch of us sort of startup folk are, maybe not quite control freaks, but we like to be able to shape what's our day to day and what we're doing. And the idea of working for, like, a huge corporation, like one of the FANG companies or something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
loads of talented people there, but that is like total anathema to me, because it's instead of being able to say what I'm doing all day and why we're doing it, you're having to toe the line from somewhere else. And and sure, maybe I can do that a little bit for a little while, but I like to be able to shape what I'm doing myself. I think the other one is that's huge for me is being able to pick the people that you
Yes.
get to work with. You spend 8 hours a day, probably more, like 10, 12 hours a day working in an office, or doing whatever you do. And the sort of great joy that I've had this time around is being able to handpick from a really good set of people to come and work with again. So I genuinely really like the people that I work with. And so it's like it's a sort of privilege to be able to handpick that set, so that when you're jumping on calls and you're dealing with all the challenges of building a company, that you've got a set of people around you that you enjoy spending time with. I mean, it turns out that part of my meaning is solving difficult problems with people that are really good and I like working with, and that's a big part of what I get out of life. And I think it's when it has to be solving a meaningful problem. And to me, this is like such a meaningful problem right now. We're right in the middle and super relevant to everything that's going on. So that's kind of what drives me. And then I think as well, I've got a couple of young kids, and it was like, well, hey, they're going to be looking at what daddy's doing, and if daddy's sort of sat around or not doing anything very, very much, and we still have a pretty good life, maybe they get the message that that's the case, and they haven't seen the blood, sweat, and tears that went into the last company. And so I think it's important to set a good example as well. So they're definitely aware of the hours and effort that's going in. And pretty much all I do these days is work and then family, and that's it. And I think doing it the second time, we can get into it, but I'm being much more efficient with my time, because I have to prioritize the family time. So I can't just throw loads of time at Harmonic all the time. I need to make sure I'm spending the time with them.
I'm very curious to hear, how are you managing your time differently this time around? Obviously, with little kids and a family as a priority.
I really think it forces you to be so thoughtful with how you're spending the hours that you have, right? Because there just aren't as many of them. So I'm there. I start very early because we've got a UK office as well as the US, so I'm up for overlap with them. But I try to finish my days by like 5:30 if I can, and obviously it stretches later sometimes, or I have to come back online later. But 5:30 onwards, I'm there when the kids are there, so I'm there for dinner as well, and spending a bunch of time. And so that's something that isn't really negotiable for me. And I think one, it's being very conscious with my time, but I also I did a bit of an exercise with a coach, where he spoke to all the sort of closest people around me, including some family, but also obviously my leadership team. And then collected the feedback, and then we had a bit of a session.
It can be very eye opening. It can be brutal in a
totally
good way.
Yeah, it's so I got a bunch of learnings out of that, and I think and they're also comparing and contrasting me this time to last time. And I think the biggest thing that I've tried to shift, and I think I have, is that I'm trying to not get involved in as much stuff, and you kind of know what it's like, right? Is the founder, you kind of want to be on top of everything, and it's difficult to let go of some things. But I've got such a great team that I just guess I'm able to delegate more this time. And that way, and so you've got to really figure out, like, what is it that I can do that no one else can do, and then I'll do that. But sometimes you feel kind of lazy or a bit slopey shouldered about some of the things that are coming. It's like, oh, I could jump in and fix that, but you have to kind of remind yourself that that's not what you're there for. And if you do that every time, you're not going to have the bandwidth for anything else. So yeah, it's sort of sometimes a little hard. I'm a product guy by background, and so anything that's going on in the product that I'm not all across, I feel a little edgy about, but the team's pretty good at dealing with my questions. And
this is something I can definitely relate to, well. Especially when you're on the first track. And I felt that way too. It took me until later in the company to really realize how important that is. And maybe I still hadn't done a good job even later. I'm excited for when I inevitably do my next thing. I'm going to have to pick your brain on that a little bit more. How do you not get involved when you really would have in the past, or a worse version of you would have?
It's hard. Yeah, totally. But I think you'll find you've just naturally learned it on the last journey as well. So the version of you that finished the last journey was vastly different from the one that started it.
It's interesting also what you said earlier, which is this, I don't remember who said this, but the goal of life isn't to be happy. The goal of life is to be useful. And that really, isn't it? I can't remember who said it. I really wish I could attribute it to where I heard it. I just can't remember now, but it was something that really opened my eyes. And so your desire to be useful and to also show your children in the next generation that having a vocation and being hardworking, doing something, providing for society and also for your family, that this didn't just fall from the sky for you or for them, and that you
Right.
had real effort, blood, sweat, and tears, as you put it, to make it happen. It's altruistic's the wrong word, but it is admirable, extremely admirable, and says a lot about you. Do you mind sharing a little bit about your second time around? I know time, being able to pick a really good team, thinking about where to get involved, where not to get involved. Like those are three things that stand out to me as the second time founder. Are there other things like when you're thinking about capital raising or you're thinking about hiring or maybe building out the team? What are some other learnings that our listeners can take with them on their journey?
I think it is so much easier the second time in so many ways. Just starting with the capital raise. So when it came to Digital Shadows, yeah, we bootstrapped for 3 years in London, around the kitchen table. Just we eventually got a space in a co-working, environment when it was just me and my co-founder. There, James, and they let us pay for one and a half
Love that.
desks because we couldn't afford two. Right, that was the level that we were at, and it really was
That's how
baked
it
beans
is.
and noodles and just trying to stay alive. And I was still in my 20s at the start of that journey. So contrasting that this time around, and that time around, so we ground away. Eventually, we got some of the some pretty significant clients, including some of the banks and so on,
That's awesome.
involved in signing up for annual contracts. And then even then, so I got some very limited funding in the UK at that point, which was great. There was at the time there wasn't a lot of venture activity, but Passion Capital was the one, Eileen Burbage there, that took a
Shout
chance
out
on
to
us, and
them.
they're
I love
fantastic,
that.
and still very close with them. Totally. So that was, and she had the conviction. Where we had one coffee meeting, and she was like, "Hey, I want to write you a term sheet," and I'd already met at that point. I met like 10 other VCs that hadn't done anything, and so then they all came in. I ended up with a whole bunch of term sheets, but I took hers because she
I
had the
It's
guts
amazing.
to go
And
for
how
it, right? And
so
you want the
sorry, I
people
just
that back
on that
you.
topic, how
So that was,
important
yeah.
is picking the right capital partner? And I know that you've had a lot of capital partners after Passion Capital as well. How important is that? And what would you recommend people look for?
Oh man, that's a huge topic, but I think it is important. I think people, and the biggest mistake that people make is going for brand over individual, because yeah, I think the brand of the firm does matter for sure. But it's the partner that's going to be on the board with you that you really need to care about, because that relationship is so critical. And I think the key, I think, is to diligence the individuals well, talk to other people that have worked with them historically and had them on their board, and really, and understand the ones where it didn't go well, because they can all give you a couple of references of people that liked them and had a good journey, but find the ones that didn't go well, and figure out, how do they act in the downside scenarios. So yeah, I think there's a lot about that. And then I think if you can find ones that actually understand your space, that's always good. There's plenty of kind of dumb money around, but I think finding people that actually understand what you do and where it fits in are going to be more additive and more understanding of your journey. This time around, I was very fortunate, compared to last time, that I got funding immediately. So we founded the company on a Friday, and the Saturday I had the term sheet that I wanted from 1011 Ventures, who are just fantastic. If you're doing anything in cybersecurity, I think they're a just unbelievable starting point, because it's all they do. They deeply understand it, and they're good people. So that was just tremendous. So I could get hiring in my first week of founding the company, and start building, and that just makes a tremendous difference for speed of movement. And I
Mhm.
think the area that I'm in this time, the speed of execution is critical, because this is a live problem today. There's money to be spent today if you've got the solution right. So speed
And luckily,
is
because you've done
everything
it before and
to
you're
us
spending your
the
time
second time
wisely
around.
and you're thoughtful about how to go about
Yeah,
it, you're crushing it, which is
totally.
why I appreciate you spending your valuable time meeting with us and giving us insight on how to build your next company. Can you give us a few other points before we let you go? Like what else would you recommend? When it comes to the capital raising, and maybe just to put an emphasis on this point, diligencing the partner that's going to be on the deal, and obviously also the firm, but really understanding where did it go awry, and how does this person act, and what's their character like, and are they trustworthy, and are they in
Totally.
high integrity? Are they empathetic to what it is that a founder goes through? Have they maybe done it themselves? You know, a lot of people haven't.
1,000%. No, a lot of people haven't, and I don't think that's there's good investors that haven't done it themselves as well. But it's obviously helpful from an empathy perspective if they have. I think it's hard to get away from that. Is the most important point in that cycle. I think doing it
Uh-huh.
the second time, doing it again in security is a bit of a cheat code. I'm always impressed by entrepreneurs who start businesses in completely different spaces and sectors, right? Because they're having to become an expert in something completely new. Their network is not going to help them so much, and all those things, right? So that I think is far more impressive than what I'm doing, which is kind of cheating, right? I'm building another cybersecurity company in an area that I
Yes,
know really well. My existing network is extremely helpful. I try to not burn
you're great
bridges
at that.
and try and build pretty solid relationships in a lot of areas. So I've got a lot of people that I can call up and get in front of pretty quickly. So that's been helpful for fundraising, but also for initial design partners and building out partnerships as well. And so I think it's a bit of a cheat code. And then I think beyond that, it's just you find when you're doing it the second time, you've got more of a sixth sense for what's most important right now. And I think that's the biggest difference between me last time and this time, is that last time I was just throwing a lot of stuff at the wall and seeing what was sticking and learning as fast as I could. This time I kind of know in my gut what's important and what isn't, and you can just prioritize for the business really effectively. And because I think half of building a startup is knowing what isn't important and when to say no and how to just be extraordinarily focused. And so that's everything that I've. There's a quote, and again like you, I can't remember who came up with it, but
Oh,
it's I might be wrong, but I'm not
I like that.
confused. Or we might be wrong, but we're not confused. And I use that quite a bit for us. Like we're pretty clear on what we're building, and we're pretty disciplined about sticking to it. And then if it turns out we're wrong,
I
we'll
mean,
go
laser
and do something
focus.
else.
I mean,
But
laser
but in the
focus.
meantime, we're pretty good at saying no and staying on course. And I think that's the biggest problem. Yeah, biggest problem for companies that I see, because I do a little bit of investing and advising, and so many companies just try to do too much, right? They're too scattergun. There's too many problems they're trying to solve for too many different people, and you have to go through a bit of that in the early days. But then you have to pick. Right? I think you have to focus and try to get things moving on a narrow path if you can, because that's the only way that you're going to win as a startup.
C- Can we talk about go to market? Your obviously product background, deep technical background. What are you doing different on the go to market this time that's getting this ridiculously fast growth that Harmonic is seeing now and will continue to see?
Yeah, we're experimenting a lot at the moment. Actually, I think one, we're better, but two, the market has changed a lot. Right, I think when I was building Digital Shadows, there was a lot of emphasis on the sort of classic model of you get this many BDRs, you map this many account managers in there, and you started to look at the conversion rates between them, and then the top of the funnel metrics, the MQL metrics, the key, and trying to track. That's the only way that you judge
Mhm.
performance of marketing a lot of the time. And I think that's really shifted. And what we're trying to do this time is we're focusing a bit more on being quite approachable and personal on LinkedIn and elsewhere. LinkedIn's the sort of primary focus for a lot of that activity. So we're very active on there. I'm posting a lot and trying to just be fairly human and personal in the age of AI on there. And then I think talking about AI, I think there's opportunity to do things differently in how you do the outreach. Like I don't really want to go back to that BDR model where you're hiring a bunch of, you know, athletes in their 20s who come out of college and want to hit the phones and call up a bunch of people that don't want to be
Is
called
that
up.
over? Is that over? Is that era
I
dead?
don't know. I don't know, but we're experimenting right now, and I think there's an opportunity to do it differently, and we'll see if this works out. But yeah, I think the what we're looking at is we've just hired a go to market engineer, and we're looking at how we can employ a lot more technology in our outreach and making sure that we're being very thoughtful about that. And so I think it's a combination of that, and then in the early days, it's sort of trusted network, right? And so we have a pretty significant advisory board of some pretty significant folks in the industry that are very close to us now and understand what we're doing, and then we're trying to build out a very much a referral based go to market where there's people that are using us already, are happy to introduce us to their friends, and building it out from there is the best, because a warm introduction from a trusted source is worth a lot more than any BDR outreach will ever be.
100%.
So I think it's being thoughtful about that. I've got someone running that who's excellent, and I think if it's all left on the CEO's plate, it just never gets done. But if you're thoughtful about how you do advisors and referrals, you can make that really punch for you.
What about things like in-person events, dinners, which I know are very popular, where you get a group of industry experts and influencers who may be running technology inside of large enterprises, or even something like, I know this is timely, like the RSA conference or just conferences in general. What are your thoughts on in-person events like?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, we had the COVID era and everything went to webinars, and there was talk of events dead and all that kind of stuff. And then I think it really has come back. I think there's things that scale and things that don't. And when you're earlier, you can do things that are a bit less scalable. And so for us, we are running quite a lot of regional dinners that we make sure, rather than us be the host, we've got one of our advisors or customers to be the kind of the main host for that. There's no sales pitch. We're just getting to know people, and it's a very softly relationship building approach that we're taking to all of that. And I think that's, I don't know, for me, that feels better and more authentic, and you have pretty authentic conversations and it's less forced. What I would say though is that there's these people have lots of dinners to go to and lots of options, and so you've got to, depending on where you are, that might work well. The other thing that we're trying to do, one of my advisors said, well, if I want to come to something, I want you to make me smarter.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that was quite a good way of putting it. So I think it's, if you've got something to share, or you can at least have a pretty good conversation that is stimulating, and they learn something genuinely out of it, and they're not just getting pitched to, then that is the other route. So we've got a few things in that vein as well. But yeah, I think events still make sense if done right. I think the big ones, right, we're about to go into RSA. For me, the value mostly comes from what you can book in advance, right? You're going into that event, and again, it's like you're catching up over a coffee or whatever, and getting some food together, and it's those chats are the ones that make the difference. I think it's the rest of it is a bit of a branding exercise, really.
Yeah, the advantages of these conferences are that we're all in one place. And so if we were going to meet up in person, like, this is just a great excuse. We're already in whatever the location is. Let's get together, get a coffee. One theme around what we're talking about is building relationships. And it's something that you are very good at, and something that you have spent time and effort, definitely with Digital Shadows and again at Harmonic. What advice do you have for people that want to build authentic relationships in the AI era, as you put it?
I think, as more and more content is AI generated, people yearn for authenticity and like actual genuine connection, I think. And so, I'm just trying to, like, last time around with Digital Shadows, I was probably a little too corporate-y in how I was talking about things and wasn't really sharing so many opinions. And so this time I'm just trying to be a bit more shooting from the hip and posting more genuine bits and pieces that I'm seeing and reacting to. And so I think that's, from a more of a marketing perspective, that's one thing. I think the personal relationships thing, I think it's, I don't know, everyone's kind of different. It's partly how you're built, I think, and how you orientate yourself. And like, for me, I think it's always been about the long game there, and trying to help people when you can, and it comes back around. And it's what I love about Silicon Valley. That's part of the ethos, right? And I think I also see that a lot in the security industry. I mean, it's because it's a trust based industry that people remember, right? If you've don't treat them well, or there's been some issue, then it's going to come back to you. And so I think that underpins everything. It underpins how we think about how we deal with our customers and how we treat them. And you get the referrals because you're trusted and you treat the people well. So if that's a big part of your approach, you need to make sure that's the case, and it starts from founders down. So yeah, we're sort of pretty fortunate. I mean, even now, you know, I mean, the biggest superpower I've got is probably the fact that I've got folks still working for me now that we started working together 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and there's a bunch of them, and we're, you know, hopefully they're still having fun today, but I am, and it's kind of that. So I think it starts with your team, but then externally as well. Of course, it's you know, I've got a lot of the same folk helping us as last time for, you know, whether it's finance or HR and some of the channel partners. It's the same service providers even that I built good relationships with, and then you know they'll go the extra mile for you when you need it. So that's my approach.
Well, all those people that, especially internally, that you've hired, they grew with you. So when we're talking about how we got better, or you were saying how you got better, and I feel like I got better. Well, that's true for everybody. That's
That's
true for
right.
your HR team. That's
That's
true for
right.
your engineers. That's true for your internal CISO, CTO, whatever it is. And being able to work with them again sounds like a huge blessing.
That's right, and you sort of start your careers together, and you level up together, and then there's folk that are you know, this time around they're all doing more senior roles than they were last time,
That's
and
right.
you know, it's just great. You grow people with you, and those are the best people often, and then you sort of build a unit that can protect itself a little bit, because if you introduce someone that's not doesn't fit that you know, the sort of ethos you've got, it'll detect it pretty quickly, and that's was you're hiring externally and you gain your recruiters. It's just a lottery every time, right? And yeah,
Even,
you do your best, but
yeah, this is
yeah,
another quote. I don't remember who said it, but the problem with bad hires is that they interview well.
yeah,
Otherwise, like, we would have never brought them in. But on the flip side, building good relationships, having a good team that you can do it with again, having the experience of already having raised money, knowing which investors you want to work with and what to look for in them, knowing the customers, at least some of them, and getting tapped into the network of the influencers that you have relationships with. That all sounds like a cheat code for Harmonic and for you specifically this time around.
yeah. No, for sure. I think that's right. I think part of, I mean, going back to why I did Harmony, I mean, one of the things was I felt like, hey, look, I know that I can do this, and I'm blessed with this opportunity because I'm sat here in Silicon Valley. I could raise the money. I've got people that want to come and build the company again. You know, it felt like I'd be really missing an opportunity here if I didn't jump at it. So yeah, and like I said right at the beginning, I'm just having fun every day, like genuinely. I mean, there's going to be tough times and whatever down the line, but at the moment, I'm just you know, really enjoying it.
Yeah, I mean, I can sense the passion. It's palatable. It's clear why Harmonic has been so successful. It's clear that you guys are going to be incredibly successful, and I'm so excited to watch your journey.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I you know, hopefully, this is yet another reason why you need to do your own one again before too long.
I'll tell
It's
you,
inevitable.
you're definitely, it's infectious. Your passion for it is infectious, Alistair.
That's great.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining the show. Thank you for coming.